Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today we have two special guests from Clean Counts, and one of the special guests is Ben Gerber, and he is the president and CEO of Clean Counts, and the other guest that's with us at the same time is Rob Davis, and Rob is the Chief Growth Officer of Clean Counts. So what's happening, Ben and Rob? What's going on with Clean Counts? Are you keeping things clean?
We're trying the best that we can. Yeah. So
great to be with you, Sean.
And great to be with both of you. And tell us what's Clean Counts. What are you counting? What's your definition of clean? And are you working against another company called Dirty Counts? I think I like your company better.
We haven't found anyone that's using the Dirty Counts name, but if we do, we'll let you know.
It's probably some oil company or something, right?
It probably, it must be. I mean, but what we are, we're a really interesting organization. So we are a nonprofit technology solutions provider in the environmental attribute space, which is a real mouthful to say. But what we do is we verify renewable electrons were put onto the grid in our REC tracking system. And we also have a thermal tracking system where we're able to validate and then issue renewable thermal certificates like biomethane. And we are one of the largest in the US. We just issued our 2 billionth certificate a few months back. We were started by the state of Minnesota and Wisconsin as a regional solution to environmental problems, but we really grew out of that. And we now have generators registered in our system in 48 states, multiple Canadian provinces, and really opening up access to environmental certificate markets, which are a pretty invisible infrastructure of renewable energy markets, because validating that you have the right to claim an electron is a really critical piece of measuring the success of both voluntary and compliance goals.
Yeah, especially when, I don't know, do you know about spooky action at a distance? Like if there's an electron that's paired with an electron and then it's working in a different parallel universe, do you track both of them or just the one that's in this universe? That's like an Einstein thing, spooky action at a distance. And
we are one universe only. We have not ventured into other universes. So,
and that other universe, that's where the Dirty Counts is, probably.
Yes, yeah.
And they're probably on some really cold planet, and they're trying to warm it up by burning fossil fuels, and they're giving them extra credits for doing that. Yeah.
Sean, that is a fantastic, how might we? And you know what? We'll put them out of business eventually, but one universe at a time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I know.
We know that the renewable energy certificates are maybe an invisible infrastructure, but they're often the difference between whether a project happens or doesn't happen, because it's an economic adder to just about every project.
Yep. And maybe what we could do too is explain what a renewable energy certificate is. And so a lot of people call them SRECs for solar renewable energy certificates, or coal RECs for coal renewable energy certificates, right? Or no, that's not renewable.
That's right.
Unless you have a lot of time and you've been hanging out with the dinosaurs and all that kind of stuff.
That would be the fossil energy certificates. Yes.
Yeah, fossil. Yeah, FECs, I guess, instead of RECs. And so what you have is different states have different programs, and most states don't have SRECs. And so maybe you can explain so everybody has an idea of what's happening.
So one REC, at least now, and we'll talk a little bit about the evolution of where RECs are going, environmental attributes in particular, represents the 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy that was put onto the distribution system or the grid.
Yeah, and so a megawatt hour is 1,000 kilowatt hours. And so if you had a kilowatt of PV, a couple of solar modules, you would probably make 1 point something, SRECs or RECs in a year. So
yeah, I think my solar system in Minnesota is 11 kW on my house. We produce about 20 certificates a year, something like that. I'd have to verify that.
All right.
Yeah, Minnesota's a little known nice solar market, but because you can't track electrons when they're put onto a common carrier network, the distribution system or the transmission system, you have to decouple the environmental attribute from the physical commodity, the electrons, and then they can be bought and sold to make claims. So sometimes people will refer to unbundled RECs or bundled RECs or SRECs or RECs. In the end, they're all the same. The REC is representing that 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy. And then there is the data behind that. So what people refer to as SRECs means that it was solar production, but it can be from wind, hydro, anything considered renewable by a state definition. As you mentioned, different states have different definitions of what they consider renewable, and they sometimes create tiers of those. So that's why you see in some places, when we talk about SREC markets, there may be carve-outs or prices or floors that dictate a price or a marketplace for solar-derived RECs.
Mm-hmm. And also, Sean, I'd also say that in addition to compliance markets and the state requirements, when we look state by state, there is a huge and growing voluntary market for renewable energy, as you know. And so, private companies love to be able to transact and have the verifiable proof of renewable energy use. And that's what our certificates are. They love the fact that the regulators love our system, but they also love the fact that our registry has a very friendly user interface. Our customer service team is absolutely unmatched, kind of obsessed with customer service. And so this invisible infrastructure is a thing that most people don't think about, even, energy wonks and nerds like us, but it's a critical component to just about every deal.
So how do you verify that this renewable energy electron is like really green and that somebody isn't tricking you, or, like they say it's coming from their solar and then they have a diesel generator in the basement?
Yes, we have a robust verification process where we go through both public and privately available data to verify that it's real. And I've got to see the other end of that. Actually, when I put solar on my house, I was able to see from the back end how everything is registered by the utility in our system, which was actually pretty fun because I saw some of our documents in that process that have to be signed by the owner if you're in a net metered facility. Then you give up the right to that solar REC through that utility program. So there's a robust verification process. And I mentioned looking at EIA data. We look at geospatial data, satellite images, where we can go down and look at a house to see if it has solar on it, to make sure. And then we validate it against other registries to make sure it hasn't been registered anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a series of, as well as legal documents too, that require you to disclose if you registered the facility anywhere else.
And the risk is, Sean, that if we ever were to find out that someone is committing fraud, and very much that would be an edge case that it'd have to go through an extraordinary level of effort to fool us, they would basically experience a lifetime ban from our system. Mm-hmm. So we don't take kindly to fraud, and we built a structure that instills and supports more and more and more trust in renewable energy and clean energy markets.
Great. Yeah, so I could remember there was a big rush to do solar in New Jersey in like 2008 era, something like that. And there was a really good SREC program that they had there. And it was somewhere around $600 for an SREC, which is the equivalent of 60 cents a kilowatt hour. Because there's, and it was a gold rush, and people were growing their business, like doubling it every month. It was kind of out of control. And I remember what they had was special metering for their solar. And so they'd get a certain kind of meter, and then they would measure the energy coming out of their solar inverters. Like they'd have a, special meter. So is it still happening the same kind of way?
Yeah, so the New England and the PJM states use two different systems to do that. And they have different rules around, we require revenue quality meters. But yeah, what you're discussing is that, especially in restructured or deregulated states, whatever term you want to use, the states because they didn't have the same balance sheets as in the vertically integrated utility markets, had incentives come through on the REC side of things. So on the purchase energy from those homeowners. That in the regulated markets that we work with, we tend to see something very different where you have net metered programs where there's an incentive based on the kWh that you sell to the utility, and then they get the REC to recognize that versus a requirement that a utility buy the RECs at a specific price. And a lot of those programs on the Eastern Seaboard had very high price floors that were used as a way to incentivize people to install solar. Not, whether that's a good policy is going to be a discussion for those states, but we get that question a lot as people, not as much anymore, but when I started 10 years ago in 2015, people would say, hey, I want to start installing solar in Wisconsin or Minnesota. I'm getting $400 or $600 a solar REC there. What should I plug into my business model for those states? It's like, you're looking at, it can be $1, a few dollars. It is a marketplace that does change. And that's because the incentives are just done in a different way to install the product.
And what we appreciate is that as the registry, we don't have real visibility to the price. So we don't track or collect any of that data. We just operate the trusted registry for issuance and retirement of those renewable energy certificates. So most of our, 25 or so full-time employees and our 20 or so longtime software development contractors are software developers. So we've got more than 500 years of software development expertise in-house and more than 120 years of registry specific software development expertise in-house, which is funny because it means that most of our crew isn't thinking of themselves as they're not going to clean energy policy happy hours because they're mostly writing code all day. And, they're much more identify as a coder and as an IT person than they do as a clean energy policy wonk.
Great. Yeah, so I remember back in those days with the New Jersey SRECs too, I was thinking like, man, this is too good to be true. And the way that they had it structured was there was a certain amount, I think they called it a solar alternative compliance payment. So if the utility didn't meet the quota for a certain amount of RECs or SRECs, they got fined. And so they would bid on these SRECs that they could get less than that fine. And then what happened is all of a sudden one day, it took off so much that they met the quota. And then the price dumped. It was like supply and demand, and it went down overnight. And so you were just mentioning too, then I think they started doing these minimum floors so that you had to get at least a certain price. And I know that some of the big places for SRECs, like where you get a good return on investment, were like New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C. I think Washington, D.C. might have the best one out there.
Yeah, and that's where you saw a lot of like third-party leasing of rooftops and other things to get the installations up there to get that incentive payment. Yeah.
And I think the problem with the one in Washington, D.C. is it's just, a city that it only has so much space. It's not like you're going to go like put a ground mount on the National Mall,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that would be a good idea, though. They got some room.
Well, the policy structure is a really interesting one, and we're also finding ways to add additional attributes into the RECs themselves. So back in 2023, we introduced to the market Pollinator-Friendly SRECs. And so that basically is, if you look at a ground mount project that might have turf grass or gravel, we know that there are buyers, some of the voluntary market buyers, that actually want to transact on projects that are not turf grass or gravel. They're looking for acres of flowering meadows growing under and around those panels. And so there are thousands of acres in the United States of solar projects that meet those criteria. And so we embedded that data onto our platform. Ben can talk a little bit about how we went about doing that.
Pollinator-friendly SRECs. That sounds pretty cool.
Right.
You got like photosynthesis, photovoltaics, and you got maybe a couple of maybe you got some honey.
Yeah. Well, and I even have, if I look back here, this is a beer that was brewed with honey from pollinator-friendly solar habitat.
And these honey sticks directly from beehives on flowering solar farms.
And what's interesting about these projects is that the co-benefits, I think, are really where the market is trending. It's not just a product differentiation. That helps both in the marketing of the power and because we're starting to see some customers demand from offtake partners that they want this done in a sustainable way, because it is interesting when you see a big solar farm and you drive by and then somebody's cutting it with a 2 or 4 cycle mower to get the weeds back, which are some of the dirtiest. Maybe that's not the best way to manage that habitat in every solar array. But those co-benefits, including we're looking at things like water quality. So based on the way that you build the facility, you can actually dramatically increase the soil health and quality by managing runoff and other things. We're also looking at, we call it the RECs Plus, which the Nature Conservancy has been a great partner on nationally. And looking at, and Salesforce has been a big leader in this, is these co-benefits of certain things. So for example, looking at tribally situated facilities. So someone might want to buy output from a facility that's located on tribal lands for specific reasons. We're also seeing people trying to stand up programs about localized benefits of the power, that the revenue from the power generation is going back to certain communities. We always say we're not the right people to standardize that, but we can track it as an attribute once it's been certified by a third party. And then that co-benefit can then go on to increase revenue to the project owner, or also in some ways help the projects get built. So understanding the benefits, the local air benefits of facilities and quantifying all of that, standardizing it, and then in the future, we think putting it into these certificate markets.
It's a great way to differentiate projects, particularly in the face of rising NIMBYism. So what we've seen is companies like US Solar actually win awards from the Solar Farm Summit for Best Agrivoltaic Project of the Year. It's a standard ground mount situated style system in terms of standard height, but they're just doing different things with engaging the community and engaging farmers to enable different farming practices within the fence and under and around those panels. Also, a company like Pivot Energy is, selling to Rivian, and they just put a YouTube video up about grazing sheep under and around all of their projects. So, buyers are really in the seat to be able to say, hey, we're really looking for some kind of rec. It's not just a vanilla rec. They want a boutique rec. So our technology is able to help facilitate that transaction.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSEAN, that's Solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. I had somebody on the podcast recently who was in Illinois, and they were talking about, I think it was like an SREC, that it was like predetermined how much it would end up making. So it kind of reminds me of, they used to have rebates in California based on expected performance. So do you see much of that?
Yeah, so we actually are one of the systems authorized to track for the Illinois Adjustable Block Program. So what they've done is that you can bid into this auction that then buys the output over a specific amount of years from your project through the Illinois Power Authority, the IPA. So that is.
Does that have something to do with your beer, the IPA, that you just showed us?
No, is this an IPA?
It is.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a British summer ale. So it's a little different. But
made with renewable energy pollinator plants from behind the solar arrays.
Sure. So
you can't get greener than that, I guess, huh?
I don't. And if you drink it on site, it's even better. You just localize the benefits.
Yeah, while you're working, of course.
Yeah, we'll have to see if there's a collaboration opportunity between the Illinois IPA and some breweries' IPA.
I know. Maybe it was some kind of like subliminal marketing thing. Yeah.
That's great. Well, yeah, we've certainly grown as a nonprofit serving these markets. Ben started with the organization, I think, just 10 years ago.
Great.
Now, taking us from 3 employees up to more than 25 and growing from less than $1 million to just north of $10 million this year.
So what do you see happening with the SREC markets since they're only in certain states? Like I'm in California. There are a lot of people doing solar. They're like fastest growing place right now is Texas. And there's not really SRECs, or are there in these markets?
Yeah, well, they're like, as I mentioned, SRECs and RECs all SRECs are RECs in that they just have a solar attribute to them. And so we are seeing growth, but we've seen a movement away from those really rich incentive programs as a way to finance the projects, more towards the market-based mechanism of things like hourly matching. So if you're familiar with that under 45B, one area where solar does really well is that when you look at the way where markets are operating, that the highest cost times of production are going to often be when solar is able to dispatch to the grid. And so the ability to sell time-based RECs based on the need to match them, whether it's at a green electrolyzer for 45V or it's at a data center who wants to say that they're 100% renewable 24/7, they need to buy the certificates that match that hourly demand. And so what we're seeing is a lot of interest in opening up those types of markets so like a REC from one part of the day may be worth a lot more than another part of the day. Whereas now it's usually just based on the gross output of the certificate. And so it operates much more akin to the way that energy markets operate at an RTO level, where it's...
Okay.
Yeah, and Sean, we're going one ISO at a time. We're starting with MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator that operates basically from Manitoba down to Louisiana. But we're implementing full fractionalization, basically hourly RECs throughout MISO. We'll have that done by the end of Q2 next year. And then we'll start to look at bringing that to other ISOs and other regions. But as Ben mentioned, we've got registered generators in 48 out of 50 states. And we know that there's increasing differentiation in the market because there's different customers and different buyers that want more and more and more data. And because we rebuilt our system from scratch in 2017, we're able to quickly incorporate those different attributes and provide advanced registry services with a platform that has a great customer service.
So you said MISO is, I guess, what is it? The
Mid-continent.
Mid-continent Independent System Operator. So all grids have their independent system operator. Manitoba to Louisiana, is that what it was? So what's the chance of them breaking off and becoming their own country?
I give it pretty low marks. Low chances there.
So we're not worried about like a civil war right in the middle of the United States. That's good.
Yeah, it's
Not over the way the energy markets are set up, at least.
yeah, definitely not over the way energy markets.
Hey, you never know. Maybe we should just, instead of having states, we'll draw the lines at the energy markets,
Well, I'm hopeful that, as long as we can kind of keep creating, delicious food and beer products,
There you go.
Maybe that can bring us together.
Yeah, I'm sure that people in Manitoba and all the way to Louisiana could agree on, having your special food and beer products that would be very tasty.
Yeah, agreed. When we start to think of energy as an ingredient, and a particularly delicious one, I think that we all can come together and agree on a lot.
Yeah, like honey and nuts, those are different sources of energy. You can convert that to kilowatt hours, calories to kilowatt hours. There's a conversion factor. So what percentage of your business, or let's just say of the RECs that you're dealing with, are ones that are voluntary versus ones that are like for a state? Like, so the voluntary ones, I guess, is just like somebody makes a computer server farm or maybe like a Bitcoin mining farm or something like that. And they decide that they want to tell everybody that it's made with green energy. And that would be like more voluntary versus like they're getting money from the state.
Yep.
Or a utility. Yep.
So when I joined the organization in 2015, more than 80 to 90% of our revenue was from compliance markets. And the very little voluntary was often run through utility green power programs. So they were still serving in some ways a regulated need because the utility regulators say if you're going to sell that type of product, you have to prove that it's green through the use of RECs, and because they were familiar with RECs through the state compliance programs. That we really saw an inflection point around 2017. It happened rather quickly where voluntary customers stepped up. It really coincides with the rise of PPAs. And now we see, and the data also confirms this through places like NREL, that more than 70% of our volume in our system annually is for voluntary customers. And you see that as well for the installed renewables across the country, that the vast majority of installed renewables over the last few years have been to support voluntary customers that aren't required to do this. And so we're really seeing this interesting switch of where at one point the compliance markets, you mentioned things like the alternative compliance payments or ACPs and price floors were once, driving the conversation in voluntary markets. It's now flipped where voluntary markets are really controlling the narrative. And that's where you see things like clean energy standards evolving. So not just saying it's got to be renewable, but if carbon is the concern, we want to address that. And we issue now nuclear certificates and other types of certificates that are zero emitting, but aren't renewable. So they're distinguished as alternative energy certificates, but we're seeing that interest in people diving down. And now you're seeing people say, look, I want only renewable. Or some will say, no, I'm more focused on the lowest cost way to meet my zero emissions power goal. And we can support all of that.
And another thing too is like, I've always known as SRECs to be based on energy. So megawatt hours, kilowatt hours. But then there's also the real-time thing. So the energy peaks in the middle of the day, but you're using energy at night. And a lot of times people could use energy storage to shift it over. Is that taken into the equation now in any places?
No, but there have been some pilot projects, and we've been working on them with things like Energy Tag, which is an international hourly renewable energy certificate standard, and looking at how we can track storage. And I think that's where the really unique opportunity for solar becomes is not only is it often producing at peak times where prices are going to be highest on most grids, but that it can be matched really well with storage and then dispatch that storage at the times where the grid is often most expensive to produce, and often that coincides with highest emissions as well. So now that we see those gas peakers and coal plants that are on there, often
because sometimes people might be like, oh yeah, we're 100% renewable energy, and they made as much as they used, So sort of like based on something like net metering, they would be. But then if in the daytime they're making twice as much as they're using in the nighttime, they're, using a peaker plant or, some kind of fossil fuel, then some people could argue that they're not as renewable as they could be. And so maybe that would be like a complicated thing to tackle someday, and then also give people the extra credit for having energy storage. I guess there's no kind of energy storage benefit in an SREC market. Well, it is an SREC too, but or a REC market, I should say. Yep.
Well, and I think this is where the really interesting opportunity is. Hourly brings in new markets for solar or SRECs because of the time of production, which may coincide with important either emissions reduction. So there's two really evolving decarbonization strategies on the voluntary customers. There's the traditional annual accounting, which is how the greenhouse gas protocol requires. They don't require hourly matching yet. They are updating that. And one of the proposals is to require hourly matching. But there's nothing wrong with annualized renewable. If you use 100 megawatt hours in 1 year, acquiring 100 megawatt hours of RECs, that would allow you legally under the FTC guidelines and the GHG, globally the GHG protocol, to say you're 100% renewable.
Okay.
That is changing. And some of the ideas are to do hourly matching. The other is emissionality. And the idea of emissionality is to build projects in the dirtiest parts of the grid, and based on marginal emissions, that you can then claim the grid reductions from that installation.
Well,
and to say that.
Okay, great. Emissionality, that's the new word of the day.
Yeah. You learn anything today, it's the 24/7 and emissionality, and they both have scientific research to back them up, and there's these really dueling processes. I like to think of them not as dueling, but as complementary. In the end, they're both trying to decarbonize the grid. They take a different approach. We will support both of them.
Okay.
And Sean, they both depend on registries updating their software. So we're in the very fortunate position of having a software development team, about 40 folks with, as I mentioned, like 500 years of software development experience. So we're very comfortable with updating our own top tech stack to enhance, with whether it's emissionality or more granular data about location or time. That's just part and parcel with what we do. And, the Pollinator-Friendly SREC tracking is just like a kind of a passion project. We got some inquiries from the voluntary market. They were having trouble selling their SRECs, and they were like, hey, look, all of our projects meet this standard. Can we just attach this to the REC? And so it became easier for them to sell their RECs once they had more data embedded in the REC.
Okay.
So there's different kind of buyers for different kind of products.
Okay, and I have a most important question that I save for last. So I have a lava lamp, and I want to be able to tell people that I run that on solar energy. Can you give me a certificate for that? I know it gets hot and it heats up this wax and it flows through the oil. So how can we accomplish that?
Well, we can't, but
Yeah, so we don't broker certificates. We create the certificates through data that's right. But there are plenty of folks that may reach out to you when they hear this and say, I can buy some RECs.
yeah,
Okay.
there are plenty of unbundled RECs that can power your lava lamp,
Okay.
including the same kind that were used for the printing of the board game Catan, and the entire printing of the game Catan New Energies, which is a game of Catan that is experiencing the worst effects of climate change. Now they have to decarbonize. So they used pollinator-friendly SRECs for the printing of that game. And so I'm sure that the company that provided those SRECs could power your lava lamp as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much. How do people find you so you can do some clean counting for them?
Yeah, so you go to our website, cleancounts.org, or shoot me an email, ben@emrets.org, if you're curious to learn more. Same with Rob at Ben at cleancounts.org, Rob at cleancounts.org. That was our former name was MRETS. We recently changed that to better reflect what we do, which is clean counting.
All right.
And reach out on LinkedIn. We're both on LinkedIn and we're all over it on a regular basis.
So great. So thank you so much for letting everybody know about what's happening with the RECs and the SRECs. And thank you so much, Ben Gerber, CEO and President of Clean Counts. And also thank you so much, Rob Davis, Chief Growth Officer of Clean Counts. And everybody out there, stay clean. And if you want to find out more about learning about how to talk about SRECs, and you want to figure out how energy is different from power, and You want to get yourself educated and NABCEP certified, go to SolarSEAN.com. That's SolarSEAN.com, and you will get smart. Ow!